Hello, everybody, and welcome to the game programming panel. And here joining me today is Blade, the Surf Chief Technical Officer at Bumble Bear Games, Kate Smith, the Game Development Lead at Craftsman Plus, and Jay Philancius, Software Engineer at EA. I'm sorry about that. Yeah. So we're gonna start off with a quick overview of like your journey here, like where did you study, and a quick run through of a work history. And Kate, you can start off.
Right, yeah. So, hi everyone. I'm Kate Smith. I'm a developer at Craftsman Plus, the head of playable ads, or just basically the games that we create. We make like mobile game ads a lot, or ads for really anything. And I head up the interactive ad department. So, yeah, I graduated from NYU, studied game design there. And then basically right after graduating, pretty much landed at Craftsman Plus. So I've been there since there were only like 6 people in our startup. And now we've got like 20 or 30 people and growing a bunch, which is exciting. And it's fun to be like on the ground level or something like that. So that's what I do most of the time. I also part-time teach at NYU, teach programming for games, the intro to programming class for people who are just starting out. And so that's also super fun. But yeah, that's essentially my game development journey in brief.
Great. Jay, you want to continue with the answer the question?
Yep, absolutely. Hi, everybody. My name is Jay Villasís. I'm a software engineer with Electronic Arts. I work out of the Seattle office at the moment. Journey. Went to school. I was born in Los Angeles. I went to school in San Francisco at the Art Institute of California, San Francisco. I got a degree in visual and game programming. After graduating, I went back to Los Angeles and worked for a small startup. Not a small startup, just a small independent company called Trigger LLC. Then from there, I moved to a company called Blue Mobile. They're pretty popular for doing a ton of mobile games. And then about 4 years ago, I joined Electronic Arts, and I currently work for the EA mobile division. So I've been in mobile game development for 8-ish years. Kind of lose track after some time. But I used to work for the PopCap game studio, working on the next Plants vs. Zombies game that was coming out. But most recently, I now work for their mobile central technology team. So I help build tools, systems, pipelines for our entire mobile organization, as opposed to just building a single game at this point.
Great. Gyro, you want to finish off?
Yeah.
Question.
Hey, I'm Gyro. I am based out of Brooklyn. I grew up originally in northern New Jersey, and that's where I went to college. I did study game development with a focus in programming in college. I did not graduate. I had a job offer when I was in college, took it because, of course, I did. And I was at that studio, SortaSoft. It was a small Brooklyn-based studio for several years. Eventually, SortaSoft merged with another company, and we became Bumble Bear Games, which is where I work now. So I've been there 6 or 7 years, I think, at this point. And I also do a lot of contract work. So I take gigs on the side, do a lot of installation pieces and kind of one-off art stuff as museum stuff, kind of whatever interesting projects come my way. So
great. So the next question is a bit of an overview of your day-to-day task and like exactly what your responsibilities are of your job. Okay.
Cool. So I basically head up, as I mentioned, I like head up the playable ad division at Craftsman Plus. So basically, all those like annoying mobile game ads or whatever that you come up with on your phone. I mean, like we're making those, but we don't make the annoying ones. We try to do a really good job at like making game ads that represent the game and that are, not like shady and misleading. Like you see a lot of those. So I've worked on a bunch of different things. Like I've gotten a chance to work with a lot of really cool like intellectual properties, like working with like Marvel and like with like WWE and like Walking Dead and like Sonic the Hedgehog. I got to do some stuff like, so it's been really fun just to be able to like be in a space where I can really touch like a bunch of different games, which is really fun. So it's like in any given like, year I'm making like, at least like a few games every month, and so it's like quickly churning out lots of mini games essentially. Like, so basically when I started, I was a playable ad developer, and like this was back when there weren't very many people at the company. So our head of engineering was basically the only engineer on the team, and so or in the company. And then he hired me and another developer, and then we became the first Play to Live developers. And so we were working on making a bunch of games. And then we've kind of expanded from there. We've been doing some really cool platform work and stuff where we're working on making essentially tools for companies to go and make their own playable ads. But I mostly work on the side of making people custom ads. And so I am working on, with a bunch of really cool clients, making really cool games, and also sort of leading up the team and overseeing all the different projects that the engineers under me are doing.
Yeah.
So, yeah, a lot of JavaScript programming. It's all JavaScript all day.
Yeah, those ads can be sometimes kind of annoying. I'm glad you're doing it nice and well represented.
Yeah, like that. It's I'm doing that, but not in the way that you think I am.
Yeah.
It's not. You don't hate it.
Not
Try.
And so Jay, how's your job like, and what is it like day to day?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'll kind of answer it to kind of two parts, since I was more of on the game studio side for most of my career, and I just kind of within the last 6 months I've moved to Central Tech. And so when you're working on a game team, my day-to-day was a lot of collaboration. So coding, obviously, shocker, we're on computers, we're coding, we're building stuff, we're testing, we're building code, we're doing code reviews, we're building unit tests, all that awesome stuff. But I think the biggest thing that's kind of unique to the game industry is just how much collaboration we're responsible for. And so oftentimes I found myself working on either a UI system or working on a specific PvP feature or anything like that. So the big part of my day is actually making sure that what I'm building is up to the design docs, or making sure that the lead designers are okay with it, challenging them when we need to, making sure we're getting alignment. So it was really maybe 60, 70% coding, 30% collaborating with the creative side of our studios. But now in my new role, since I'm Central Technology, we actually we don't have artists or creatives on our team anymore. And so lately I've actually been working more on the technical direction of our mobile portfolios. And so what I mean by that is, since we're a large company and we have multiple studios, and we're not just trying to build one game, ship it, build another one, ship it, we're actually trying to build a sustainable, kind of a development ecosystem so that we can build games quickly, test, get them out. And so a lot of what I do now is actually talk to a lot of the technical directors of different studios and make sure that the things that we're building are sustainable and can scale to not just one team, but multiple teams. Big company, so the name of the game is, making sure that we're being efficient and we're not wasting development time. So that's a lot of what I do now, is more on the technical kind of roadmappy side. So again, just talking to different leaders in the technical organization and making sure they're aligned. As far as the programming languages go, I definitely basically used Unity and C# for most of my career. I was definitely more of a client-based engineer. But lately I've been actually building web tools in support of our different studios. And so I've actually been doing a lot of TypeScript and React over the last 6 months, which has been a pretty big change for me, but fun. It's enjoyable to do.
Yeah, so the majority of your day is the programming stuff, but sometimes it depends on the demands of your company, what they need you to help and collaborate.
Yep, exactly.
Yeah. So for Gyro, how's your day like? How's your responsibilities?
I love being on panels or even just in discussions with people whose jobs are technically the same as mine, but actually completely different, just because of the scale of the studio or their exact specific. So my day-to-day is a little nebulous because we only have a dedicated development team at my studio of 3, really. It's me, the president, and the CEO. And we're the development team. We have some contractors that we work with for specific things. Like if we need a pixel artist, we hire them. If we need somebody to do a back end for data, we'll hire them. But primarily it's us. So my day-to-day changes a lot. Most of my time is spent working in Unity. I primarily develop in C#, and that's where I do most of my programming. And being the CTO and lead programmer developer, I mostly program and code. But many days I'm doing quality assurance. Many days I am doing design. Many days I'm balancing and testing. Sometimes I'm managing the Discord because I'm the best at Discord at the company, so it falls on me. So my day to day is very, very different. But I would say my average day, if I had to pick one, is I'm spending a lot of time in Unity, and I'm spending a lot of time working very closely with a very small team, reviewing things very rapidly. Okay, guys, I put in this new control system for the game. Everybody, let's test it right now. Let's get on a call. Let's review it. So very iterative, lots of back and forth with a very small team. So.
Right. So like, you guys have like similar titles. Sometimes software engineering, gameplay programming, and game development roles are like sometimes used interchangeably. Is there any like difference between each of them?
I would say the only. Oh, I'm sorry, Kate. Did I cut you off?
No, go ahead.
Yeah, I would say the only distinction is really between gameplay and not gameplay, or like that term gameplay specifically kind of entails the coding or programming for user-facing, like the things that the players will see on a day-to-day basis. Maybe that's the only kind of distinction, but in general, like software engineering is what my title. I'm actually looking at my LinkedIn right now, and it's been software engineer for the last 8 years, and I've done a variety of things, whether it's building UI systems, doing some gameplay stuff, building PvP systems, building web tools, building pipelines. So I would say game developer, it's all kind of nebulous. Again, gameplay is just a specific aspect of the game programming kind of titles, really.
Yeah, I feel like the titles can be very nebulous in small companies. Like in my company, like I think I started out and I was a software engineer, but then they were like, actually, we're going to say, but also I think the ad when it was, or like that the job was presented as like a game development. So they kind of were using those terms interchangeably. And then, so I'm like a game developer, but also like internally in the company, my title is like lead playable engineer or lead playable developer. But since nobody really knows what playables are outside of the ad space, I just say game developer. It's easier to understand because I'm making games.
Yeah, I think that's definitely true. It kind of depends who you're talking to. Like if I'm talking to the guys that I'm working with who are doing the tournament system back end, I may be a software engineer at that point, and that may be how they internalize what the CTO really does in that situation. Like I may be a software engineer to them, but when I'm giving a talk at a game development conference about game design, well, then I'm a game developer, and then I'm doing gameplay programming all the time. So I think a lot of it's on who you're talking to, who's asking the question. Those are really all interchangeable, especially in the games industry. I'm sure that's less true in other tech spaces where like the software engineer does like the back end for our data management systems. That's what they do. I don't think that's quite the case for my role, at least.
Right. So what are some kinds of like hard and soft skills that someone would need to be successful at their job? Kate, you can go ahead.
Well, okay. So my job, obviously, like I mentioned before, we're very much doing stuff in JavaScript a lot because anything that you're making that's like web-based is going to, heavily rely on JavaScript a lot. So when we like hire new developers, we give them a JavaScript test, and you've got to pass through this test to prove that you understand JavaScript. When I was in school, most of the games that I made were in Unity with C#. And so I had like a little bit of JavaScript experience, but not really that much. So, but then they gave me the test and I was like, oh, this is pretty much like the same thing. I know, a bunch of programming languages. I can figure out the syntax for this one. And so it just takes like, being able to pass the test. And then once you're in the job, you just like, eventually you'll learn getting used to it, I remember it being really interesting. Like over like the first year of me working here, it was like, at the very beginning, I felt like I had no idea what I was doing. And it's like, oh no, it's like, that imposter syndrome thing and you don't know what you're doing. And then like into a year, I was like, man, I can do anything in JavaScript. I know JavaScript like the back of my hand, and it's crazy. So then when new people come in, if they ever get like frustrated and stuff, I'm just like, don't worry, like you're going to get it because I've been through that. We've all been through that. So yeah, like it was interesting. I majored in game design at the NYU Game Center. And then I also did a minor in like computer programming, like web applications, at the like in the computer science department at NYU, and that was actually really useful because like those skills weren't always the skills that I was using when I was making games in like Unity, but when I went and started making games in JavaScript, I was suddenly like, oh yeah, I have all these web skills that I like didn't even realize that I would really need in my game development career. Like I just messing with like HTML and CSS. Like I don't have to do that super often, but at least I have experience from that from my minor in school. So I actually found that to be super helpful as well. So I kind of like was supplementing my game design studies with like additional computer science studies. And then I just had like all these languages under my belt, which just really helps you, you know, the more programming languages you know, like the easier it is to grasp onto new ones.
Yeah,
How about
it's.
Oh, go ahead. You can go ahead.
So I would say it's definitely. I would say a hard skill is definitely like learning how to learn in that sense. You know, like being able to learn in your first month on the job. You know, being able to learn new languages. Like the more you feel comfortable learning and feel like you can just dive into stuff, like even if it's challenging, like Kate mentioned, you know, you may feel frustrated or whatever, but the hardest skill for me that I'm really looking for, like if I'm working with somebody or looking to hire, you know, a contractor or something, is can this person figure out how to do what they need to do, even if they don't know it already? You know, it's okay if you're not a super competent C# developer, you have some programming skills, you're willing to learn and like really try at it. So for me, that's the hardest hard skill for sure.
Yeah, let's see. So for me, I would say let's do the hard skills like really, really quickly. For me, I think probably the most important thing I always make sure to ask anyone who's trying to get into games is their familiarity with object-oriented programming, which is a design pattern. It's really common, and the reason I like to ask it is because it maps really well to the concept of games, which if you show mastery or understanding or competency in object-oriented programming, it's going to be really easy to talk about, hey, I need to build a system where a character jumps every time they catch a power-up or whatever. Like it just maps really well. And for those that haven't checked it out, please, like object-oriented programming like is a
very important
concept. Yeah. That you want to learn. Aside from that, going into soft skills, I always like to say like you need to be confident but not cocky, and it's a very thin line to balance. I think Gyro and Kate kind of touched on this. Really, it's as an engineer, our job is to solve problems that other people don't have an answer for. Like when you first start out, like yeah, Google it, and Stack Overflow or Unity answers will kind of guide you in the right direction. But after a few years, you're kind of just stuck in the waters, and so that's really where where it's important to be able to be confident and say, yes, I can do this. No, but knowing that it's going to be challenging. I will say in my career, the engineers I've worked with who I've not enjoyed working with or who I've recommended they move to other teams are the ones who when they get presented with something challenging, the response is, oh, I don't know how to do that, or that's pretty hard, or they bought from the challenge. So as a soft skill, be very confident, take the challenge, and then to counter that, make sure you're also willing to speak up and be very vocal about what you're looking at. My biggest mistake early on in my career was, like Kate was talking about, said imposter syndrome. That, by the way, I don't think it ever goes away. I'm 8 years in, and I still half the time feel like I don't know what I'm doing. But anyways, my biggest mistake when I was first on the job was I didn't know what I was doing, or I was messing something up. And I had an opportunity to task my senior engineer for help, and I didn't because I was embarrassed. I didn't want him to think I wasn't very good at what I was doing or whatever. So 6 months later, we kind of almost got into a fight because he basically thought I was so stuck up that I wasn't listening to anything he was saying. But in reality, it's because I wasn't asking for help. And so just as a general piece of advice, it's okay to say, I don't know how to do this. Can I get some help? I will say more often than not, if your fellow team members will come and help you and be more than happy to help you if you ask. If you end up with jerks who don't want to help, then just go to a different company because those aren't people you should work with anyways. But anyways, that's the big one for me on soft skills is be vocal, be present, and don't just be the engineer that sits in a corner and then just says, I did it or I didn't. Tell me what to do next. That's where you'll fail.
Yeah,
I ask for help all the time.
Yeah, definitely. And I also think that another useful in that similar vein of soft skills is just being really good at being communicative with your team members, because a lot of times as an engineer, you're going to have to be talking to a producer or a designer or somebody who's more on the creative side, someone who's more on the business side, and they don't understand technical terms and things like that. And so just getting really good at explaining what's happening on the technical side in words that they'll understand is something that's really good. Also, just I think that engineers have sort of a there's a stigma that engineers are not very people friendly or whatever, and it's just it's really not true in my experience. All the engineers that I've worked with, we've all been very good at communicating and things like that. And so I think that's just something that I always go out of my way to be yeah, I'm you can talk to me and I'll help you understand what's going on the technical side, and just to make everyone on your team feel oh yeah, she knows what she's doing. And it's very helpful just to make sure always in communication with everybody.
Yeah. And then one final thought related to kind of both those things is that it behooves you to be personable. Like you're going to be working with the people on your team pretty closely for often, years of time on a project. So if you can, be comfortable asking for help other people when they need help, and just overall be friendly, like, you're all collaborating on this essentially art project together. We want to hire people. Everyone wants to hire somebody that they like as a person, and that, they feel as a good person that they want to spend time with, that's going to help you a lot. Like surprisingly a good amount. If you're a competent developer and a genuine person, people will go out of their way to make sure that you succeed.
I was also going to say that if you weren't going to say that, like, that's one thing I think people really underestimate in like the job interview process, is just like people want to work with people that are fun to be around, because you're going to have to hang out with them all the time. And if you're not, someone that's enjoyable to, work with, then nobody's going to want to work with you.
It's all really good points. Like honestly, as a computer science student, I've always been taught that like problem solving is what we do. It's not really just coding. And it sounds really applicable to game development and how you have to work with a bunch of different people and collaborate. Moving on to the next question. What life, work, educational experience helped you the most in pursuing your career? So Kate, you can start off.
I think so my like educational journey was actually kind of interesting, because I went off to college thinking that I was going to do something completely different. I was like, I'm going to go into drama and do acting. So I was at NYU doing acting. And first year, I absolutely hated it. And I was like, this is horrible. Why am I doing this? And I was like talking to some people, and they were like, oh yeah, we're taking some games classes. And I was like, games, that sounds dope. I'm going to do that. So I just switched over and was like, yeah, this is for me. And just, never looked back. And so I feel like I have this like unique mix of like creative and technical like skills that really mesh well in game development and in game programming, because when you're making games, you're solving problems. Like Nelson was mentioning, like that really is true. Like the, people who are engineers, like more than, just writing code, like our job is to solve problems. And in games, they're often very creative problems. So, it's like sometimes you have to work in tandem with, design, and think like, okay, so if I'm having this issue where, this bug is appearing, like how do I restructure my code to make it make more sense? And also like the more that you work on games, the more you'll like get a mock-up of a game that I'm supposed to make. And then I'll be like, okay, I can just by looking at this, like, or just by playing the game on the App Store or something, I can get a good sense of like how I would structure this code in my head. And so I think just like the experience, like being well-rounded is helpful in games, being like having a lot of experience with a lot of different types of games. Like in my job, I make, a lot of playables for a lot of different types of games. So like there are match 3 games, there are like, fighting games, and like location-based, like Niantic type games, things like that. There's all kinds of stuff like that. So just having a lot of experience with a lot of different types of games really helps me to be able to make a lot of different types of ads. And yeah, and then also just, I think studying at NYU was really helpful for me because of just the wider range of like array of teachers that I had contact with. And just, I think like one of the really important things about when you're in college is like, take advantage of your professors, like talk to them, make connections with them, just drop in their offices and see how they're doing. I mean, obviously you can't really do that a whole lot right now and everything is like remote, but I think one of the best things that I did for my game career was just to be like really active in my school and like make sure that I knew people and like, went to events and made those connections, because I think that those connections are like super invaluable. Like for the most part, that's how people get jobs too. Like most jobs you get from connections more than just like blindly applying to things. So I think that like, so, definitely like you don't have to go to school, like you can learn in other ways, but I think one of the most valuable things I got out of school was like the connections to other people in the space.
Yeah, I think that's definitely very similar to my answer. It is those connections. And I think that specific to that, what's helped me the most in pursuing my career directly as like a pursuit is advocating for myself in those situations very often. I got that job before I finished college because a local game studio sort of stuff was looking for developers, and they asked my college, and they were like, hey, we're looking for some people that are going to be graduating soon, like good programmers. Do you know anyone? And the head of my department knew who I was. Like I had a personal resume with them. They trusted me that they could recommend me and advocate for me. And, so they said, yeah, Gyro is a great fit. Like, check them out. And I recently finished up a project with Grubhub, and I got that job because I had some friends that were visiting from out of town. They're from Boston and they were in New York, and they're like, hey, let's hang out. And they were telling me about this, and they knew some people at Grubhub, and they were like, oh, we're going to do this installation piece, blah, blah, blah. And I was just like, that sounds cool. I'd love to make games for it. Can we set up a meeting? And they were like, sure, okay. And we talked about it and it ended up working out, so, you have these relationships that you have already, your classmates, your teachers, your, people that you met at a game jam, right? Like, keep in touch with them, advocate for yourself to them, tell them what you're interested in, find out what they're interested in, and don't be afraid to let them know that you're good and want to do cool stuff, and they'll let you know that they're good. And, when you see an opportunity for them, make sure you give it to them as well. I recommend artists that I've worked with all the time to other studios and friends and stuff, and then they'll recommend me. So yeah, advocating for yourself and your teammates is super valuable.
Yeah, I'll add, for me, what I've found over the years is once you get the job, once you're an engineer, once you're on the team, just make sure you treat your job as professional as possible. And what I don't mean by that is I'm not advocating for work 10 hours a day, every single day, and lose your work-life balance. Like, not at all. Let me just put that out there. What I mean by that is, like, when you take pride in the work that you do, and when you are, again, asked to do something, make sure you are going to deliver it, whatever it takes, or if it's something that really isn't going to work, raise the flag as soon as possible. You'll be surprised how much having ownership and pride in the work that you do will take you so very far in this industry. I'm not trying to put too many people on blast, but I've run into the engineers over the years who are just complacent, and they're the ones who hit a certain level, and then they're comfortable, and maybe that's not a bad thing. If that's where they want to be. But if you want to keep moving up and up in your education, or in your career, or in your skill set, or in your organization, like it really is. You just need to work, be a hard worker, like be willing to put in the work. And the way it kind of ties back into those who are in school, if you think you're going to not have to get a textbook or read the internet to scour how to solve something when you're in the workforce, try to burst the bubble, but you're going to have to be ready to learn and study all the time, even once you're out in the workforce. Like I said, I think a large chunk of my day solving problems that don't have easy answers is just looking at what other teams have done, checking out other GitHub repositories, checking Stack Overflows, and double checking, oh, this was written 5 years ago, so this is irrelevant now, so I have to go forget this whole thing. So if you're in school and you have a good, and you work hard, and you actually take the time to study and really care about your projects, your exams, whatever, that's a really good leg up once you're in the industry. Because like I said, just be present, work hard, things tend to work out. And then the only other thing I'll add, again, with games being highly collaborative, and like I said, we work with people of completely different skill sets. One of the things I found has been most helpful for me is I'm actually very good personally at knowing my audience. And so what I mean by that is make sure you know who you're talking to. If you're talking to a crowd of engineers, go technical, deep dive technical, talk about all the time, space, complexity, all that awesome stuff. But when you're talking to your design team, leave that for another time, right? And so just know who your audience is. Try to pick up on little cues. Some people, especially if anyone's interested in becoming a technical lead or technical director, one of those big skill sets needed there isn't necessarily just being super technically skilled, but it's being able to know, okay, I have this group of engineers, and if I push them a certain way, they'll give me the best results, for the product. Versus maybe this other person, you need to be a little bit different. And so, learning how to read people, and like I said, kind of just in that social aspect, there's a lot of collaboration. So be ready to get to know the people you work with.
Great. So what are some things that people who are interested in pursuing game programming or software engineering today can do?
I think one of the biggest things that I recommend is making games on your own and posting them online. I think I have an itch.io page where when I was in school, I would post pretty much all of my assignments that I would do. Basically, a lot of our teachers had us turn in homework that way. You just post on itch.io and give them the link. And I just found that to be a really great way to just get feedback on my games too, because because people play it and you start to see the analytics of oh yeah, this many people have played this. You can also get a sense of okay, what kind of games are people interested in? What kind of games do people really connect with. Like, you know, especially when people leave like comments and reviews, things like that. It's like super helpful. So like when I was in, so my like, you know, senior year, I made a capstone game for my BFA. And that game was like something I worked on like a whole semester and poured a lot of work into, and then put it on the internet. And then something I also recommend is what I did which is enter it into festivals. If you have something that's really like big and something you're proud of, enter it into IndieCade, enter it to like IGF, any of those like festivals, even smaller ones. Just because being able to show your game to people and get feedback is like a really interesting, it's like very rewarding, but also humbling, because you get all kinds of feedback. You know, you'll hear from people who really like it, you'll hear from people who don't. And it's very interesting to just get a perspective, because I think when I'm developing, I think like I'm making this game, like this is more for my personal projects. I'll be thinking like, okay, I'm making this game more for me and I really can connect with it, but nobody else is going to care about it. But then when you release it out to the world, you can oftentimes see like, oh, actually other people are really into this, and it can be really good to hear that. So yeah, I definitely recommend making games, putting them on the internet. Like participating in game jams is super fun, and super like helpful. I think that I tend to have the problem when I'm making games on my own is that I am like a perfectionist and I want everything to be perfect. Game jams are really great for like, you just got to get it done, you know, and you have to cut things. You have to like really work on scoping things down, which is like one of the biggest skills you can have as a game developer, is like learning how to scope stuff down. Like you're going to have all these big pie in the sky ideas, but you're going to have to make it so much smaller by the time you ship the game out. And that's especially true of game jams because you only have like a limited amount of time. So like, do the global game jam, do any kind of local game jams that are happening. Just make games with your friends or make them by yourself, whatever you want to do. But I definitely recommend just practicing making games and posting them, sharing them with people.
Yeah, everything Kate said, 100% agree. Like there's no, I'm not going to add too much more to that because I think that was pretty succinct. Like just make games. I think what I'll add though, it's kind of two pieces. One, because engineering is a hard skill, at the end of the day, if you're not already like either enrolled in like community college or any of the programs are out there, or any sort of boot camps or anything like that, the internet has a ton of free resources to get going, to get programming. Honestly, I think a lot of what the college I went to wasn't very good. I wouldn't recommend it anyone really ever attend. I think, anyways, that aside, I think what actually helped me get the jobs that I have now is actually I started developing games in Unity, and the Unity learning community is rock solid. I mean, from the Learn team they have in-house to the community they have to all these YouTube videos, there's so much free stuff on the internet. Like, please spend a couple days and hop on YouTube and see what people are building and get ideas. And again, like a bachelor's degree type, or like a bachelor's degree isn't required, but it definitely helps. So, schooling and education is important to get a job as a game programmer. And then I think the last thing I'll add, for anyone who hasn't experienced it yet, apply to any job you have, even if it says I need a veteran who's 10 years of experience, but we're all going to pay you a junior salary. Like, you'll find that all over the place. Apply to the jobs, and more than likely you're going to get rejected, but it's good practice. Like, get the practice of how to interview, what interviews look like, what are the different questions you're being asked, and don't be afraid to fail. I've lost count over the years of how many places have rejected me. I've had Amazon say no before even having a face-to-face interview because of a silly algorithm question that I was asked. So just apply to whatever you can and go to the interview, do your best. And if you get feedback, great. If not, this is a learning experience. So have at it.
Yeah. Make games is the answer. And you'll get that from anybody who's ever made games for money ever, is make games. So that is the truest, most yes answer. And I will add on as my sort of secondary thought is that it kind of relates to what Jay was saying, which is also know what those jobs look like. Even though I'm not looking to switch jobs at this exact moment, I know what the job postings at Blizzard are. I know the job postings at Dots are. I know the job postings at Take-Two are. I take a look at those things. I keep my eye on. I look through LinkedIn pages to see how other people's resumes and websites and whatever look like, and copy them if I like what they're doing. Just know what other jobs exist, know what other things are in the market, and then exactly what Jay said. Make sure that you do apply to them when they interest you, because you don't want the first place that you apply to be your dream job, because you won't get it. Your first interview is going to be awkward and weird. Like I got lucky that I just got kind of handed a job. That doesn't usually happen. I know when I go to move to my next job, I have no interview experience really. So I'm already starting that process. I apply to places, interview places that I don't even necessarily intend to work at. Just because it would be terrible if I'm like, I really want to work at Blizzard on the Hearthstone team. That's my first application. And my resume sucks and I don't know how to do an interview and I blow it, and I could have just prepared, So yeah, know what the industry's like, make lots of games so your portfolio and resume are strong, and then try them out.
And I'll add one more really quick one. This should be easy. Attend stuff like this. Like, listen to people who've done this and join these panels, join these free conferences, join paid conferences if you can. Just get in there. Like, see what people are up to. Hopefully it'll start to dispel this myth that being a game programmer or even a game developer is an elitist or very special thing. Like, it's just hard work. You've got to work hard at the end of the day.
Yeah. Learn from our mistakes.
Another note I want to say about, I mentioned briefly about like submitting to festivals and showing your game off at live events like that, which obviously isn't something you can do right now again. But eventually, we'll be able to go out places and have a booth to show your game again. And one of the most valuable things about that is just making connections with people. I've met so many people and exchanged so many business cards with people who just, come by, play my game, and then, we'll email later and talk about stuff. And like, also, you might get lucky, your game might win an award, and then you might get some press out of it, which is really great because then people on the internet start to take notice of you. So yeah, that's another piece of advice I just wanted to elaborate on.
All right, so the last parts of the panel, we're gonna go address some audience questions. This question is from James Nunes. What would you say the hardest skill you had to learn in your career was?
I'm going to sound a little salty, and I apologize in advance for it, but the one that I always struggle with is actually those silly programming questions. Leak code, if anyone's familiar with it. Like, for me personally, I hate that aspect of software engineering, and some game studios do it as well. A lot don't, but several, especially the larger ones, tend to do it. So what I guess I'm trying to say here is understand that sometimes you'll just have to learn how to do something, even though you won't use it on your job ever. And like, it's kind of a shame, but again, like if you're trying to apply for the big ones, like I would guarantee, like if you're trying to work for Amazon Game Studios or any Microsoft Game Studio, you're going to get hit with an algorithms question, like on almost every aspect, every step of the interview process. So learning how to solve algorithms, it's silly, it's archaic, but at the current moment, it is an important piece of getting certain jobs.
I hate networking. All of it. Everything about networking. Multiplayer, hate doing it, hate making it, hate doing online stuff, hate doing database management. Anytime I have to make a call from one computer to another, I'm angry. And that's okay. It's the hardest thing that I do. It's something that's constantly challenging. It never works right the first time. And you always feel, you can read a million tutorials and there's always something not quite right. And it always needs to be updated. And, there's so many layers to it. So, there's people whose whole jobs are just solving that problem. And at a small studio, and even sometimes at a large studio, you just end up working on some facet of that, And so I think that extending from that is just that, like, you're going to do not just answer questions or learn skills. You're going to learn skills that you do have to use that you actually don't like at all. And it's going to be a really dreadful month or two while you're working out your, net code for your multiplayer. That's true.
Yeah, basically that, like, just perseverance, getting through the stuff that you don't like so that you can continue doing the stuff that you do like. There's always going to be something, or, there's always going to be a few months or weeks or whatever where you're just stuck doing something that you just is like, you're like, I hate this. And just also, like, so just perseverance, making sure that you don't shut down when you're faced with a problem, and instead be like, okay, so this is frustrating me. If you're hitting up against a wall, like, okay, I'm gonna take a short break, walk around, come back, and then I'll be like, okay, now I have a clear head. I can face this problem again. How am I going to solve it? And then there's lots of different tools you can use for that. I do a lot of, like, duck debugging, things like that. You just talk to some inanimate object, or I'll call a friend who doesn't even know anything about programming, and I'll just explain it to them, and they'll be like, cool, sounds great. And then I'll be like, I figured it out, And so just not giving up, I think, is one of the biggest things about programming, because you're often going to be running into stuff. Like, I think programming is always like, it is some of the like best times, and it's the best of times, it's the worst times. Like, you feel so satisfied when you solve a bug that's been plaguing you for a long time, but you also feel so frustrated when you're, in a rut and facing this bug and you're like, I don't know how to solve this. But eventually you're going to come up over that wave.
Yeah, programming makes you feel colossally smart and colossally stupid at the same time. You're like, dude, I am so smart. This is such a big brain solution that I should have come up with last week. It's it's time.
Agreed.
All right, so another question from Nicholas Espinoza. So I work as a QA tester. Is it important to have QA experience / soft skills as a game programmer? And if so, why?
I think that's going to depend on the company a lot of the times. At a small studio like mine, it's tremendously helpful to have quality assurance experience, at least superficially, just because, like I said, I do QA sometimes, even though I QA my own code. But I think that is part of it, as well as that even at larger studios or mid-sized studios, is that you have to have some quality assurance competency, even if it's not formal experience, because you can't just write code once and then ship it off. You can't just be like, I'm sure this works. You are going to test it. Like if your job is to make your character jump, right? You don't just write a bunch of code and then say it's done. You see if it jumps, right? You got to test if it jumps. You got to test if it jumps 100 times. You got to test if it jumps twice in the air when you don't mean for it to. So you're going to be doing some quality assurance as you develop. So if you're doing quality assurance already, it is definitely helpful and it's a good way to get some games experience. But if you don't have any quality assurance experience, you probably have more than you realize, and you should probably, when you're doing your programming, think about that quality assurance pipeline a little actively. Like, am I testing for what needs to be tested? So when I ship it off to the formal QA, they don't just go, this doesn't work,
Yeah, and I think a lot of it too, like, if you're applying for a position as a game programmer and you're like, I have experience as a QA tester, like playing that up in the interview, being like, okay, these are the skills that I learned as a QA tester, and this is how I think it'll translate, and this is how it'll be really helpful. Like, assuring the person who's interviewing you, be like, hey, look, I have all these skills, and this is like going to be really helpful. So I think like any experience that you have that's, related to games can be really helpful, as long as you explain, the skills that you learned and how you're going to use them. So I think it definitely be helpful. I mean, at my company too, like we do a lot of self QAing stuff. We I'll make a first build of a game, and then I'll get together with like the producer and designer on the project, and we'll all just play it together, and we'll kind of play test it together. So we don't have any like official QA testers. We're actually I think we're hiring some soon, but so like I have, I do a lot of that in my job too. So yeah, I think it's helpful.
Yep. The only thing I'll add, it doesn't hurt. It's helpful. I think it ultimately, to answer the specific piece of the question of like, does it help to get into games if you have this background, is that kind of applies for almost anything, as long as, I think this is what Gyro was kind of alluding to, Kate were alluding to, like, as long as you sell it properly, it'll help you no matter what. Because here's the rub of it all is once you first off, getting that first job is always going to be the hardest. After that, things just kind of work out because you get the experience and people understand that. But once you're there, once you're interviewing, like, we genuinely do not care what your background is. We don't really care what education, what degree you have. We're going to sit there, we're going to talk, we're going to do some exam, we're going to do like a written test, a whiteboarding test. We're going to talk some coding stuff. And if you do well, then guess what? It doesn't matter. I've actually rejected candidates from like not MIT, but like NYU and like other like popular schools for people who've gone to community college only, because I don't really care about the degree. All I care about is how did you do on the interview. So it doesn't hurt. But again, it really is like how you translate your existing skill set to the interview and to the potential job you're trying to get.
Yeah, even though game programming is technically programming, right? Like in a lot of ways, you're going to be hired as an artist. We're hiring people for your competency and your like ability to like create smart, like, iterative, interesting designs, even if you're doing it on a development prospect. So yeah, like nobody has asked for my degree. They're not going to. I don't have one. Nobody knows. Nobody cares, But they do ask for my portfolio, and they do ask me what kind of projects they've worked on. And they do ask me what kind of skills I have, and that's what they're going to ask you. You can say I have a degree, and they're going to say, okay, cool. What did you learn? That's what they want to know.
Yeah, like degrees matter when they're looking at you on paper and things like that. I mean, obviously, like you don't have to have one, but it helps. So you're going to look at all that stuff. But by the time you get to the interview phase, you're like, they already liked what was on paper. Now I just explained to them the skills that I have and how I can use them.
Degree good, but competency way more important for sure.
100% agree.
All right, and that's it for the panel. We've gone a little over time, and thank you everybody for coming.
Yep.
Yeah.
That's it.
Thanks for listening, everybody.
Yeah. Thanks for everybody joining us. Thanks for having us.